got Andrew Moreno in the studio. Andrew, buddy, thanks for taking some time out to sit down and talk with me for a little bit.
Of course.
Yeah.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here, man. I mean, I always like to get these started by getting a little bit of background on you because, we've met a few times, but I don't really know a ton about you. You live in the Austin area, right?
Yeah, I live actually like 10 minutes from the lodge.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. How long have you lived here now?
It's about a year and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so you're a recent move.
Yeah, I moved from Southern California. I was splitting my time between San Diego and Las Vegas for the last few years, and I like never want to tell anyone because
Yeah.
like in Texas here, it's like everyone
It's
is
taboo, man.
Yeah. I always tell people I moved from Vegas.
Okay. Yeah.
So
That's probably the safer option.
Yeah.
You're gonna get a friendlier welcome knowing that you're not from California technically.
for sure.
Yeah, but you said before we got started, you said you move around quite a lot. You've done a lot of moving in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, was that just because of family, or were you changing jobs, or what was all that about?
Yeah, so my whole life I never lived anywhere longer than 2 years, which is kind of weird to say out loud. I used to tell people it was because my dad was in the army, which is true.
Yeah,
And then I went to Burning Man for the first time pre-COVID, like around 2018, 2019, and I was like sitting in a tent talking to this guy, may or may not be altered state of mind. And I was like telling this guy asked me, he's like, "Oh, where are you from?" Or and I told him I moved around a lot as my dad was in the army. And for the first time in my life, it clicked to me that I was like, that's not really why I moved around a lot. It's mostly because like we were poor, but I always told people that it was because my dad was in the army, which was true.
yeah,
And it was funny because I mean, I don't know, 37, 36 years old. It was like the first time in my life that I realized I'd been kind of like hiding behind this.
yeah,
And it was just like me and some guy. And the crazy part about the story is like, he like, I was like, I kind of opened up to him about it. I was like, wow, this is crazy. Like, I just kind of realized like for the first time ever that I've been hiding behind the story.
yeah.
And he was like telling me about himself and, a little bit. And he's like, dude, we were really connecting. And then he pulls down, he's like, we're all in costume. He pulls down his mask and he's like a famous person.
Really?
He's like,
oh, that's wild.
He's
like a real famous person.
like a real famous person. Like he's I don't want, yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to put him on blast. But
Yeah, exactly.
Like somebody would recognize.
Yeah.
him,
And I recognized his voice, but I didn't know like,
Didn't make the connection.
Yeah. And it was just like such a surreal experience.
Yeah,
I was like,
that's awesome. That's a
Yeah.
wild thing just to be
Yeah.
at at a festival, and all of a sudden, I mean, I'm sure he goes there, wears the mask for a reason, stuff like that, for a
Yeah.
little anonymity. But that's so cool to just have that drop and be like, oh my God, I know you. I
Yeah.
know of you at least.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm having a real life experience with this guy. Yeah, that's pretty crazy,
So
man.
it's a longer story, but I haven't really told that story, but I think it's interesting. And
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I moved around a lot when I was a kid. We weren't doing great for a while, but we're doing okay now.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear, man, for sure. I mean, we all have different paths, and I understand the like coming up with a really like easy, succinct reason why you did those things, right? We don't always want to just dive into our whole backstory. It's always easy to just keep the conversation going and just be like, well, my dad was in the army. We moved around a lot instead of just diving into it. But when you're in a in a comfortable environment, it's easy to like finally come out and be like, oh yeah, that's not exactly why, is it?
For
I've never
sure.
said that out loud.
Yeah. And the relaxed mood helped a lot.
Yeah.
May or may not have had an altered state.
Yeah,
but-
yeah. I'm sure that weighed in a little bit.
Yeah.
For sure. But well, that's a cool, man. That's a cool
Yeah.
story. So you recently moved down to Austin. How long have you been playing at the lodge? Did you ever play here before you moved down here?
I think I'd come maybe once. My best friend who plays on the stream, his name is Pierre.
Oh yeah, Pierre.
So he was living here, and so I think I maybe came to visit him once, and yeah, I loved it. It's great here. I actually, a big part of the reason that I moved here is that they don't really have casinos here.
Yeah.
I've lived around casinos most of my adult life, and I found that I always had this like hard time relaxing or settling because I would play most days. And then on my days off, it was always kind of in the back of my mind, like maybe I should go play. I had a hard time putting poker down for many years. And even on my off days, I would find myself at the casino.
Yeah.
So yeah, like in my adult life, like when I was living in San Diego and now living here, I really don't play much poker at all because I like to have a separation between myself and my family time when I'm here. And then when I go on work trips, then I just kind of immerse myself in that. But,
Makes sense.
the lodge is close by. I do come down here and play, but yeah, I try not to come in here too much, mostly just because I have two young children.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What do you find more inviting about the lodge than like most casino environments that you've kind of played around for most of your career?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think the thing that immediately comes to mind is that the casinos that I've played in, which are, all over the world, but mostly in Vegas, a lot of card rooms around the country, they're run by corporations.
Yeah.
And you really feel that, it's like everything is measured and like, there's like a suit and there's just like a feel of formality. I really do feel like the lodge has like the feel of a run by poker people,
Yeah.
people that are actually from the industry that know they listen to what the players want. And I think, just playing the tournaments here and I know some of the guys, Brian, he's from Vegas, and even Jesse from the Cage. There's so many guys, they pulled a great talent from Vegas. And, that people feel that like when you walk in the door and, they're trying to shake you down right away, like you feel that too. And I don't really get that vibe here. Like, it's a free roll here. There's all sorts of things that they're really trying and they understand poker and poker people. And
Hmm.
that I think that this place more than any place I've played at really, I can say that about.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with all that. I mean, this place kind of has a magnetism to it. I mean, as you said, we've pulled people from all over the country that just want to come work here. I myself moved from Dallas to come work down here, and it really does have a different feel. Like I've worked in other card rooms, and that very much had the casino vibe, the corporate vibe, and this place doesn't. It has so much more of a hometown vibe that it also seems like it really cares about the players itself, and it listens to feedback. Like with Doug at the head of it, Andrew and Brad having invested in it, and the whole team behind that, it really does feel like it is a place made for poker players, kind of by poker players, rather than like a big, corporation. And so it really does have that feel. So I'm glad that a lot of people are starting to kind of see that and understand that. So that's really cool. So you mentioned that you have your two kids. You just recently had a baby, is that right?
Yeah.
Congrats on that, man.
Thank
That's
you. Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, you had your first one back in 2021.
2021. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's awesome. I wanted to ask a little bit about that because I don't know a lot of professional poker players that have, two kids. It's being a professional poker player, most people kind of associate that with a lot of inconsistency, having to play late nights, lots of travel for tournaments, things like that. So like, what is it like transitioning to parenthood from that kind of late night life, and how do you balance that as a poker player now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something that I'm asking myself
Every day?
every day. So if you actually can help me with that, no.
Yeah.
It's funny because actually I thought where you were going with this initially was that I found myself here on the day that my daughter was born.
uh,
Because like I was in a poker tournament and I made a day two, and it was
mm,
one of those staggered ones that the day two was in like almost like a week
a
from
week
when
later? Oh,
yeah.
wow.
And then my daughter came early and I was like, I was just gonna miss the tournament. And then
Yeah.
I wound up coming because she was born in like early in the morning and it wasn't till later. But yeah, I just think it's interesting that it's like the day my daughter was born, I'm like kind of contending with this idea of like, oh, maybe I should go play. And what I've done, as I kind of mentioned prior, is that I've really tried to put some separation between myself and uh, the casino's work life because I worked really hard for most of my like I played almost every day for 15 years, and like I was able to put myself in a situation where I don't have to work every day. So it's like I lean on that, and I know that you know it's been a changing conversation, and like basically it kind of works like I'm not playing enough, and then I go play, and then I'm playing too much, and then I stop playing. So it's a great question, honestly, and I've been really curious. I would love to hear feedback from other poker players. There's so many great poker dads. Like I know there's like Shannon Shore, Jeremy Osmus, Chance, um,
Nate
Brian
Kogel. Nate
Hastings.
Kogel, I think, has kids, and
Yeah,
he plays here. So
yeah. I just know so many guys, and I'm like, and they play at a high level, and I know that they have these same questions. And I'd be really curious to hear how other people handle it. Especially, I know it's obviously very different with like maybe the one kids, 3 kids, 4 kids, older kids, younger kids. But
Right.
I'm open to ideas because it's tough.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do
Yeah.
I'm
So
like all in, all out dad, basically.
yeah.
Like I'm at home, I'm there every day, and then I'm traveling.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it's a balance of like compartmentalization as well. It's like when you're on the road, you kind of have to dive in, sink into the tournament, think about what you're doing there, and then when you're home, you kind of do the same exact thing where you're just like trying to maximize the quality time with the kids while you are at home and stuff like that. So it seems like it is a pretty delicate balance, and I can understand how that could be a changing conversation, especially between you and it's Christy, right?
Yeah.
Your partner. It's Christy Arnett. She worked for
Yep.
Poker News at one point. Did
Yeah,
she?
Poker News and then Card Player.
Oh, okay, that's awesome. Yeah, and she plays like, has she played professionally?
She did play professionally for a few years, but I'd say it's been like 5 years, and she's just been focusing on writing a book and being an incredible mom.
Being a mom, yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome, man. I mean, it's really great that you guys are in a position that you can still work on finding that balance and have a good relationship with each other along the way. How did you guys end up meeting? Because that seems, I mean, obviously poker player, poker reporter kind of, makes sense, but I always love to hear about
Yeah.
how you guys met your partners,
This is I don't know. Like, to me, it's a great story because like it's my own story. It's near and dear to my heart, but I'll leave you guys to judge. But, so I was nine. No, I was. She was 18, and I was maybe 20,
Mhm.
and I was out celebrating. I had just won a tournament so I was out celebrating with my friends. Basically, what happened was I was playing these single table step tournaments on Party Poker, and I ran a $33 buy-in to $15,000 or $16,000.
It's pretty sick.
And I played this crazy hand at the final table. I'll just tell it real quick, where it was like, I remember that somebody raised and I had ace jack suited. I re-raised them and they called. The flop came like small cards, so this is the best I can do.
Yeah.
He bets into me, I raise. I just have ace high. He calls. The turn card is another low card, but doesn't make a straight. I remember that. He leads into me again. I raise again with ace high.
Wow,
He calls
the
again.
double raise into the
Yep.
lead. That's pretty wild.
River pairs the board. He leads into me again. I just have ace high.
Yeah.
And like to give you some context, these were step tournaments where like if you don't finish in the top 3, you're out of the step. Because they were like, if you get like first, you move on to the next step. If you get like second or third, you stay there. And then if you get like fourth or fifth or more, you're out, or some version of that.
Yeah.
And so this was the final step. So this was the last one. And so there was like 6 of us left. So I was like, it was a $3,300 buy-in single table. And so I bet all my money. I'm sitting there with ace high, and I'm like, the guy ends up folding somehow. And so I go on to win the tournament. And then that night we're all celebrating.
Yeah.
And I meet Christy. She's a waitress, and we're all talking about poker. And she was like,
Oh, really?
You guys play poker? And then my friends were like, yeah, he just won all this money playing poker. And I was like, oh, you like poker? I'll take you to and I knew all the underground games in town. So I took her to an underground game like the very next day. And
didn't waste any time, huh?
yeah. And the thing is too, like so that night that we met, she came to my house and we went out and played cards until like 9 a.m. We sat on my couch playing heads up with coins.
Oh, really? That's
and
funny.
She stayed over that night, and we've been together ever since.
Yeah.
And I like
That's
to
awesome,
think
man.
that if that guy called me there and I had like, I just won $0, that I don't go out celebrating and like go all the way across town to this one restaurant I've never been to.
Yeah.
And
Never
maybe
meet
I never
Chrissy?
meet her. I don't know. So
yeah,
like,
that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I love that. No, I love that. That's a story you can appreciate, getting in there with ace high and then all of a sudden you meet your wife the next day. That's pretty crazy, man.
I mean, I don't know what was happening in poker about, 20 years ago, but
I
was like a good player back then. And that's what I was doing. I was just like, raise. Oh, bet here. I'm raise.
clicking buttons, man. Yeah, I get it. No, that's awesome. No, that's definitely a time. That's something that I kind of envy about some players is I wasn't around during the big poker boom. I really wish I could have been in that a little bit more during the the feel times of the game and stuff like that. So when did you like really get into poker? Because like I assume that was early in the odds, like pretty close after the poker boom. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was 19 and my friends were playing they were just playing like home games and stuff, like $3 buy-ins. I came over one day and they were playing and I watched this one kid, I'll never forget. His name's Danny Phillips. He's from my hometown in Fort Wayne. We were playing and he was I was just observing and he would be like, "I think you have top pair," or "I think you have pocket jacks." And like he was getting it right.
Getting it right.
Like
Yeah.
or like really close and I was just like to me, I was like, "Oh, this is like magic."
Yeah.
You know, like you know how they do like the cards and
Yeah,
then like
yeah.
David Blaine is like finds it in your shoe or something.
Yeah.
I was like, that's about what's about to happen. I thought that was like kind of what it was.
Yeah.
And I was just so intrigued that he could know what someone could have without like looking at their cards that I went home and I started playing online. I was like Google, or I think we had Google then. Yeah. So I was like searching what to do. And then I found Poker Stars and I just started playing heads up sit and goes over and over and
Oh,
over
really?
again.
Wow. Just dove straight into heads up, huh? Yeah.
Yeah. And then I remember I was in college and it was my freshman year and I was going to class and I just kind of stopped going to class and I started to make a little bit of money and then I quit my job and it was like kind of I mean, I was not a good poker player. I mean, I kind of say obviously, but like I was making money and I was just totally obsessed with it. But yeah, it's crazy to think back on that time. But yeah, so now basically this kid, you know, and someone that I don't speak to him still, but yeah, I mean, I definitely credit him with inspiring me to learn about the game.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
awesome, man. And so you grinded cash pretty much for, I don't know what, 15 years or so before your transition to tournaments?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a long grind, man. And I mean, it's good to have that kind of obsession. Otherwise, you know, a lot of people get burnt out or lose interest in things like that, or they change mindset and transition to something like from cash games to tournaments, which you've done over the past couple of years. And I mean, coming into your recent poker career, you've had quite a lot of success with that. I mean, you're top 500 of on Hendon Mob. I don't know if you keep up with that. I don't know how accurate that stuff actually is, but it's still a pretty cool thing to say. You've got like 3.7 million wins since 2021, most notably with the Win Millions. Congratulations on all that. And even this year alone, I think you're up in the numbers of somewhere like 500,000 just in 2024, man. So that's quite a transition to go from just grinding cash to suddenly just binking massive tournaments. You know, you've had a lot of success taking out tournaments full time. And I just really want to know, like, what was the catalyst? What was the logic for diving into tournaments? Because that's really a pretty big leap that I think a lot of people choose to take at times, going from just grinding cash to just suddenly diving into the slog that is tournaments.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to speak really quickly too about one of the things you said about grinding cash for 15 years. So it's a lot like a relationship. I remember there were times when I totally fell out of love with poker
Yeah.
and I was just not growing. And I was playing low stakes and I was like showing up every day and playing like capped small games. And it like nothing mattered if I won or if I lost. And I was doing well enough. And I just remember at some point I was just like ready to quit poker. And then I realized that learning and growing and studying was the thing that was going to make me more excited about staying in poker. So I started to do that. I joined a stable. I had a great coach, someone who left poker now, and I just saw recently he's doing quite well. But that experience really inspired me to learn and grow in poker, being a part of a group with a bunch of good poker minds. But then going back to your question about transitioning to tournaments, really being fed up with a lot of the politics around like playing bigger live no limit. It's tough. Like, you know, you wait all day to play in a game and maybe you get in or you don't, or, you know, you start showing up to games thinking that like you're going to eventually get in and then, you know, maybe you play for a little bit, maybe you don't. I had some bad experiences where like the recreational players in the game were abusive. And people were like, no, but they're the action.
Yeah,
Like we
so
got to
it's
be
okay because they're the way.
Yeah, and I'm not that guy. Like I mean, I'm not. What I mean is like, I just believe that we're all human beings, and like I would rather forego the EV and like be treated like a human
Yeah.
than, you know,
Put up with bullshit.
yeah. So there was a bit of that, but then the big thing was all the smartest people that I knew in poker were playing tournaments, and they were playing bigger tournaments, and you know, it's kind of like it's an indicator of like, okay, well, what's going on here? Like, why are all these like crushers that I know like no longer playing in these games?
Maybe there's something to this.
Yeah, and so then I played a tournament right after COVID in Florida. There was like a 3 million guarantee. I remember I was like, I believe, oh, we had just gotten a puppy. That's what it was. And it was like middle of the night. My puppy was like up, and we were trying to take the puppy out. And I remember like opening my phone, looking at Instagram, and there was like one of my friends, all my friends were going to Florida, and they were like, this 3 million guarantee had like 15 million in the prize pool. It was like
Oh
right
my
after
God.
COVID.
Yeah.
And I was like, so I asked Christy, I was like, can I, she was pregnant too. I was like, babe, can I go to Florida and play this tournament in the morning? And she's like, okay. So it was like in 2 hours, I flew there. There was like plexiglass up and stuff. I played the tournament, and I was like, poker is so good.
Yeah.
Like live tournament
Live and
poker, I haven't really like immersed myself in it much, but like I've been playing like higher stakes cash, and it hasn't been like very good games or whatever. This is like, all these people are playing for so much money. This is crazy. And so then I was like, at that experience, I was like, I'm going to hire a coach, and I'm just going to go for this, because this is why all the smart people I know are playing these big tournaments, because like, this is like poker in, 2002.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Notoriously softer fields in those tournaments. I mean, I kind of feel the same way sometimes. Grinding cash, maybe you see a couple of regs that grind cash all the time. The games are hit or miss, but sometimes you dive into a tournament and it's like every table is a great table, and it's hard to beat, and on top of that, you're playing for more money than you could ever get in a single cash game, right? So that's pretty awesome. I mean, it really is like, it's a leap to go to that, but it makes sense why all of the smartest poker players, like you said, have made that transition, just because there's a lot of money to be made. Even though it can be like a grind and a slog, and you go a lot of time without maybe being in a tournament or seeing returns on it, it really feels like that kind of is where some of the money is still in poker for sure. So that's really cool to hear that that's kind of your story as well, because I've heard that from other people. I myself grind cash. For the most part, I've only grinded cash, never been much of a tournament player, but they are starting to intrigue me a little bit more. So
yeah. Tournament poker is like that pretty girl that that you should say no to, but like, you start seeing her out with your friends too, and then like, you ignore it for as long as you can, and then you show up, you're like, fuck it, I'm gonna like try to like talk to her, and then she's like toxic, and like you're like, I don't know why I'm still talking to you, but there's still something about you. Like the second I get away from you, I feel like I need you again. So like, I don't know. I don't even know I came with this analogy. I've been with the same woman for 20 plus years,
Hey,
but
man,
like,
it sounds pretty accurate.
I feel like this is kind of how it is.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, man. That's awesome. What is some advice you might give to players that are looking to make the leap from grinding cash to diving into full-time tournament play?
Yeah, I mean, even if it's not full-time tournament play, but it's like you just want to start playing more tournaments, I think you could do a lot to your game by just looking at some ranges, and like really don't just like try to like, for sure you want to try to memorize them. And I would really focus on, 10 blinds, 15, 25, 50 and below, and try to memorize as much as you can, and think, and like start to think a lot about like what the strategy is telling you, because it's not about like knowing that like, oh, I shove threes at this stack depth from this position, but now at this stack depth, it's like indifferent. That's not what ranges are for. Ranges, you look at them, you try to understand what they're telling you, you try to understand how the strategies shift. I think people that come from cash game backgrounds really struggle with these like lower SPR situations because they're unfamiliar with them. So spend some time with that. And I would say, use resources. The other thing is there's so many resources out there. You have GTO Wizard, you have every like training site. I know there's Upswing, there's a bunch. Look at ICM stuff. Just get familiar with a lot of the basic things, because one of the big reasons why I play tournaments and why I think they're so valuable is that you get to a final table and somebody's going to make like a 5-figure mistake or a 6-figure mistake. Like they're not going to do that if you're playing 2-5 they're gonna make like a $800 mistake or
Right.
whatever. I played a tournament this year where a guy like we were like four-handed and it was like six blinds, and a guy got in like second or third in chips, just got it all in a spot where he should have just folded,
Yeah.
and he busted himself, and I made like an extra, I don't know, 10,000,
10K.
15 or so.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like these are the kind of mistakes that people make, and it's like with a little bit of basic ICM knowledge, I don't think this guy would have made that mistake. And I think people that come from cash games, they have no idea how the game really changes towards the end in terms of, you know, how you want to make some basic adjustments based on stack size and payouts and that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. Is just taking a look at like the basics of tournament stuff, and especially of like low SPR play. Because even yesterday, I played a little bit. I found myself I love playing deep stack cash. That's always been my favorite form of poker. But I've playing just 1-2, just messing around for a little bit. Find myself in these low SPR situations, and I'm kind of like, I don't really know exactly what to do here in this spot. Obviously that applies all the time in tournaments because most of the time you're sitting on 20 big blind stack. So it's really good to know that stuff, especially the ICM things, because as you said, in final tables, like people can make huge mistakes when they just know that they don't have to take the risk of losing their stack to like the chip leader or something like that when there's a huge pay jump that's coming up. So I think that's all really, really good advice. Results aside from all the success you've had playing tournaments, are you happier now that you play tournaments full time versus when you were grinding cash?
I think the immediate response I have is yes.
Yeah.
It's I think the thing for me is that like I always thought I was a tournament player. Like I actually when I very first started playing was only playing tournaments before I moved to Vegas to pursue playing poker full time, and I loved it. And I was like, "This is great. This is what I want to do." And then I came out to Vegas, and I was like thinking that maybe that's still what I wanted to do, but I was playing cash all the time.
Mm.
And then I went to the PCA. What was it? The PCA? Yeah, I went to the PCA with my wife. She was covering it, and I met some tournament players that I became friends with. And I just remember this one guy in particular. He was so miserable and angry and jaded, and it was like everything about it. It was like, and he was just like this tournament guy. And I was like, he's the only one I had ever known in
Mhm.
tournaments. And I just said like, you know what? Like I never want to be like this guy. I think tournaments do I had a sense that tournaments did make people a little bit miserable, and I just thought like I should just stay away from this. And so then like once I did make the transition, I felt like I was more living my purpose in poker, which was to be a tournament player. So I still feel that way. I think I feel so much more, I guess, like alive when I play tournaments.
Yeah.
There's like things just really matter a lot. You get into situations where, your whole year can matter based on one singular decision. Whereas like you play cash games, it's that's not generally the case unless you're playing huge or whatever, which I'm not. So
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. Where in tournaments, it can all come down to one decision. Where it's like you really feel the gravity of the situation, and tournaments can really lead up to that, especially if you make a deep run in a big one. So that's really cool to know that even guys that have been doing this for a long time still feel that. I mean, how can you not? Especially when you're talking about making deep runs in like the win or something like that, where it's like this could literally change my life if I make a correct decision or an incorrect decision. So that's it's good to hear that that still persists, even though like you are happier on average playing tournaments. It sounds like it's a lot more fun for you and a lot
yeah,
more like you are forced to take it more seriously and forced to really like put all of yourself into making the correct decisions.
I could say one more thing about it actually that comes to mind is that I feel like when you play tournaments, you face yourself in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And like tournaments, poker in general, like I feel like I've really allowed myself to grow as a person. And I kind of have this like microcosm of my whole life happening in a single tournament. And it's like, getting cocky, getting overconfident, thinking that I deserve something, or, having entitlement, or feeling like I'm not enough or I can't do it, or like embarrassed or ashamed. And then like coaching myself into, letting something go and being at peace with what is. Like all of these like big life things that just happen in a tournament, and it's like, like my ego is now all of a sudden involved, and I'm like, where did that come from? And it's like they all come up over the course of a day or two or three, and it's like that experience that I have playing tournaments is the thing that I most treasure, which is like just being able to go deep within myself, learn about myself, find my own flaws and limitations. Also be at peace with some of the things about myself that are hard to deal with, because like I don't think we can just change everything about ourselves. Like, you know, so yeah, I mean, I feel like tournaments really allow me to have that experience. And I think most of us that play tournaments like experience a lot of these inner conversations to some degree, and maybe there's most likely they're different than mine, but I think when I felt like tournaments always kind of called to me, I think there's a big part of it is kind of, that piece that I was just sharing.
Yeah. No, I think that is something that gets overlooked a lot is like, I like the way you put it, how you kind of have to face yourself in a lot of decisions in poker, especially in tournaments. I think a lot of people like to glance over that. They don't, they ignore the surrealness of actually like facing your quote unquote inner demons, even when you're just talking about playing a card game. And I think that a lot of people have made the comparison that poker is in a lot of ways like life. It mirrors it. There's ups and downs, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a really good way of thinking about it, and I think that's really valuable for anyone who wants to play poker long term to really come to terms with, and in the fact that you are going to essentially face yourself and your flaws in something that comes out and is something as simple as a card game. So I think that's a really cool concept.
I'll share mine too, because like I like to, generally be like vulnerable,
Hmm.
just share my things that I struggle with,
Hmm.
and I think the one that I've always struggled with is the big thing I've struggled with in my life, which is just having discipline,
Yeah.
doing the thing that I feel that I'm supposed to do, that I really believe is the right thing, and being able to do that in the face of adversity. And in tournaments, it's like huge, because like, maybe I really want to go after a pot, or like have a certain result, or have, you know, uh, an outcome or whatever. And I feel like exercising restraint in a lot of these situations, like, is the thing that I've really keyed in on, and like been working on, and actually having some success in that. And it's transitioned over into my personal life. And I just wanted to share that, because I think it's good to share these things, because like the more we kind of reveal, the less power they have over them. Everything that we guard and keep secret, like it can grow and get bigger. And but yeah, so that's my big one, and I think tournament poker really helps me with that.
Yeah, man. No, that's a really good thought. I appreciate you sharing that. It's just something, like I said, that a lot of people just some maybe don't even consciously realize that they're facing, and it's just cool to hear somebody talk about it. So appreciate that. Um, I did want to ask about some specifics with tournaments, because like as a professional, a lot of the skill comes down from picking your spots. Like choosing where to invest your time, and specifically like what tournaments to play, especially when you're trying to balance with life, like with having two kids or something like that. Like, what are some things that you look for when choosing to play a poker tournament?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's changed a bit for me. Initially, the thing I was looking for was, you know, um, just like high value tournaments that are going to be, big field, generally soft, good structure. So those are typically like, WPT main events, WSOPC main events. There's, a lot of these local card rooms. I know the Lodge has some stuff where they have longer levels and bigger buy-ins. Generally, just like going in to play in a main event somewhere was going to be like the thing that I was most looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But as I've continued to develop in my poker career, I'm starting to think more about, challenging myself and putting myself in situations where I can learn more about my own limitations, and, um, you know, more realize my potential, which is something I'm more focusing on now. So I've been playing, I played a bunch of series at the Poker Go studio, uh, planning on going to Australia to play some series. And
Oh, that's awesome.
I see myself, yeah, gonna play some high rollers, 25Ks, maybe 50Ks, maybe go to Triton.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, I know that it's not, the most profitable thing, and those things are always a bit scary. But, again, it's changed for me a bit. I think a big driving factor for me is to really put myself in situations where I'm going to learn a lot about who I am and what I'm made of, and, say, okay, well, that's something I need to work on and go back to the drawing board. So yeah, it's changed, but I'm looking forward to, because I play these like big field, lower buy-in stuff, and it's like, I feel like, what am I doing here? Like, this is like, I just, I feel like when I'm playing in the studio or I'm playing like a high roller or playing against tough players, like I just feel so much more engaged and like I'm living my purpose. And
Yeah.
so like maybe if I am making more money in these other fields, it's like, for me at this point in my life and my career, it's not as important to me to do that. It's more important for me to challenge myself.
Yeah, no, that's cool, man. That's something that kind of resonates with me as well. Like I've had coaching. I used to grind cash games, and I always described like my desire to play against better players like all the time, like because that's when I really have to lock in. Like the game's the most interesting to me when I'm actually put to a decision. Of course, I wish some of those decisions didn't, tie quite so heavily to the monetary outcome, but that is when the game is the most fun for me, right? Like there are definitely softer games at a lower stakes that I could grind and probably even make more money in, but my favorite thing to do was like find the biggest game in the room and just see what I'm made of against like some of these other guys. And it's kind of cool to hear that even someone who's had a lot of success over the past couple of years is still looking to move up and has that kind of killer instinct to just be like, all right, man, let's see what I can do against some of the best in the world. So that's really cool. And hopefully you do really well. Like if you're playing a Triton event, man, like you bink one of those, that's a good time. So
Yeah,
good
yeah,
luck out there on all that stuff. So
for
that's pretty
sure.
cool to hear. What do you think that hosts or game runners could do to better improve a tournament experience for the players? Because as someone who's played tons of tournaments all over the world, I'm sure that you've seen like how some places do things better and some places do things worse. What are some things that could across the board be improved by game hosts?
I don't know.
Don't know.
Yeah, honestly, it's tough because like I know, especially here, like I came here to play some of the high rollers that they had, and basically like no one showed up kind of thing. And
Mhm.
it's like, it's so tricky because like even a place like this, they do so much. Like they were bringing like free barbecue and food and like offering like free or reduced rate at the beginning. They kind of like did all the right things. And I think a lot of it just comes down to like time of year and like player pool. It's like very specific to individual markets, and it's um finding the right price point. So it's, maybe the high rollers here were like slightly too big, even though I don't think they were priced that high.
Mhm.
But maybe for the market it is. But you see people in here playing on stream that are playing bigger stakes, so you assume that you can fill the seats. But like the feedback here, kind of has been like that's it needs to be lower or maybe a different time of year. So, yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think it's a question that a lot of people ask, and I unfortunately don't have a great answer.
Mhm. No, that's fair, man. I mean, it's a tough question to ask, and even the guys that are running here are still trying to answer that themselves. But I always love to ask stuff like that, just because like sometimes players who are not maybe in like a game host, game runner position, just maybe have some insight that they haven't like wanted to share or had the opportunity to share. So I always love to ask stuff like that to see like what the guys like on the ground like think maybe could be done better in terms of like improving game quality. But it's totally okay to not have an answer to that. It's a tough question, and a lot of people are still working on that.
You ask the tough
So,
questions, man.
yeah, hey
I
man,
like it. I
hey,
like
I'm
it.
trying, it's these are things that I think about and that I don't have the answers to, and so like if I have the opportunity to sit down with somebody who might, like, why not ask
Of
the
course,
question?
yeah.
So it makes sense. But something else I wanted to ask you about, everybody talks about the poker dream. Everyone gets into this game hoping to make, the classic dream of like making a lot of money, making a career in poker. As someone who's been around for a while, you've seen the growth in the game. You've seen how strategies changed over the past couple decades. Do you think that the dream as we know it is still alive, or have all these changes and on average tougher fields killed that idea as it used to be, or is it just maybe something that takes more work than maybe like 10, 15 years ago?
You mean just as like to make it as a poker pro?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think that the dream is gone. I think you definitely can still make it in poker if you have the right mind to put in the time and the work.
Mhm.
I think where the big shift has happened is that you have to be way more social and aware of the environment that you're in, and always be looking to put yourself in a better situation in terms of your game selection, networking, trying to get invites into games, because poker is popular and a lot of people love playing the game, and everyone kind of recognizes that playing in these public games is getting quite tough. So a lot of these people are getting poached to play private games, and even like, not all private games are 50, 100,
Right.
big private games. There's a lot of like, smaller private games all over many towns across the country. So it's like, being social, being someone that people want to be around, and giving action, being willing to give up a little bit of short-term EV for the game,
Yeah.
for the quality of the game, these kind of things. Having those kind of mindset, I think, is going to be very, very vital to you to have longevity in poker if you're looking to come up as a new player. Because it used to be you could just show up at a casino and the games were just good enough and big enough to you could just grind and make money. I'm not really sure if that's the case. I'm not in that scene, but my sense is that it's probably a lot tougher and it's way less likely to be the case now. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I would really push people in that direction.
Yeah. Well, it's glad to know that the dream's not dead. I'll say that
It's
much.
definitely
But
not dead. No.
yeah.
Solvers and like, cheating and online and that kind of stuff. It's, again, I'm a bit out of my depth with the online stuff, but I know that there's a struggle there that we're really trying to get that under control. But yeah, in terms of live poker, you can make it.
Yeah.
You can.
Well, that's encouraging to hear, man, for sure. I'm sure a lot of people would really love hearing that and knowing that, trying to get into the game. The barrier to entry has never been lower to a game like this. The reach has never been wider. I think we're in a really good opportunity to see a lot more new players, and it's probably really encouraging to a lot of them to hear people say something like that. So that's all really good stuff, man. I love getting the insight and all of that. I did want to ask a couple of questions about the tournament this past weekend, because obviously this is pretty good timing. We have
Yeah.
something really good to talk about.
Yeah.
You won the September 100K here. I've heard you say in the past, when like I listened to an interview I think from you a couple of years ago on Poker News, you talked about your deep run you made in the 2015 main event and how unprepared that you kind of felt in that moment. And I understand that's kind of what led you to really dive into working more on your tournament game. But I think based on the performance that we saw on the final table this past weekend, I think we can confidently say that you are seeming pretty prepared these days. So it was really cool to watch, man. And I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, we come into the final table, you're a chip dog in this game. He's got, I think Colin had you like 2.5 to 1 or somewhere in there. How does that feel coming into a heads up scenario? As the underdog in that case.
Yeah, I think I don't really think about it in terms of like chip deficit. I'm more thinking how many big blinds do I have and what do I know about this guy. Um, I'm very logical when it comes to poker, and I'm not really like thinking like I want to win or I want to beat this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's probably like an undercurrent of that,
Sure.
but it's an extremely logical approach of like what can I use against this guy that I've seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what had you seen about Colin? Because he played a pretty good game through the final table. He was very aggressive. But when you guys got heads up, I think even Rick said something in the commentary, but I could also notice it as well. I was working that day. There was kind of like an experience difference. There was like maybe, you'd obviously been in this spot a little bit more than he had, and you were like, I don't want to say Colin wasn't locked in, but it seemed like you were just like really locked in the moment. Was there anything that you had seen about Colin up to that point that maybe gave you a bit of an edge or gave you a little bit more confidence in this heads up scenario?
Yeah, I think anytime you face an aggressive opponent that you think is probably not very studied, which I don't know much about Colin. He
Mm-hmm.
seemed like he played well,
Mm-hmm.
but my sense was that he was probably not super studied, but was more aggressive. And when you face these kind of opponents, generally what ends up happening is they end up overdoing a lot of situations that they shouldn't overdo. And I say that because like, you can overdo a lot of stuff in poker, and you
Yeah.
really should, especially if you're the chip leader at a final table. It's pretty much impossible to be too aggressive.
Too aggressive, right?
But I had seen stuff, playing with him on day one, and a situation we played where he was aggressive with ace nine when I had tens, where it was like, it just told me that he was going to be too aggressive in too many spots, and have a hard time regulating his frequencies in terms of like, when you play a good aggressive player, like if I was playing in the studio against like a top tier pro, you're going to get situations where like yes, they're going to be aggressive, but they're not going to take the bluff every time. I know what bluffs they have available. They're going to choose them at least somewhat appropriate frequency. And I feel like that's the big separation between a guy like who I perceived Colin to be and, a top tier pro. So, that was kind of the way I thought I would exploit him.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I love hearing that, you picked up on some of those subtleties, because I know the hand you're referencing where he limp re-raised ace nine.
Yeah.
And, that might not strike people as like an area to mine for information, but it is. You see these spots where it's like, okay, maybe this guy, you can build a lot of inference from that about how their play style is and what their decision process is like. And so it's really cool that you kind of picked up on that, and that applied so much in the heads up scenario. Like, I mean, I'm sure that weighed into, the big hand. Yeah, like the queen jack hand, which I did want to talk to you about. I mean, I'm sure if you're on social media, you've seen this has kind of been reposted everywhere. It was a pretty sick call, man.
Yeah.
It was a really cool call with queen jack high, and I just wanted to ask about your thought process. I mean, you guys were heads up, you were about even stacked, I think, at that point. You had queen jack offsuit, and I think it was like, I don't remember the exact action, but it was something like raise call pre-flop, board comes like 10-6-4. Yeah, 10-6-4, and you bet. He raises you, and you put in the float, which is, I mean, I don't think a lot of people would understand this float, but you do have like the queen of hearts with the two hearts out there. I think that's pretty sharp because, you're ahead of a lot of things. Your cards are still very live, but I still wanted to know more about your thought process and get a little more in depth, because that's really what people want to hear.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely an interesting hand, and I guess was looking forward to speaking about it a bit in a way where I would not have been looking forward to speak about it if the guy had like king 10 or something. So, it's definitely a lot easier to have this conversation where it's like
genius when you're right, idiot when you're wrong. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. We had a lot of those moments in poker.
So, yeah, I mean, started with like a 2.5x open. He calls 10-6-4 flush draw. Basically what I'm thinking is when I go for my c-bet size on the flop is that I'm going to use mostly a big bet, and I'm going to check a lot, maybe do a little bit of small betting. And I thought my hand had really good properties to use a big bet with the possible turn cards. I can make really strong top pairs, make really good draws, that sort of thing. Have a lot of equity when called. So when I face the raise, you don't really see the raise too often over the big size with as many bluffs. But again, with the particular player type, and really what I'm thinking in these spots, what I think most people should be thinking is that, like, how much equity do I have against his range? And I felt like I was going to be folding too much equity if I bet folded that hand, because I thought that he was going to have a lot of bluffs available, like flush draws, all the straight draws, and then even his most likely value, I thought I had reasonable equity against.
Right, like any 10 or anything like that.
Yeah, like generally like an ace 10 or a king 10 are like the main hands that generally want to raise the flop. So that's just kind of how these spots work, I think, mostly. So it seemed like a pretty, I guess, standard call. So yeah, I think calling the flop was something that I was like always going to do.
Yeah, that's funny because I don't think a lot of players would think that's a standard call, but I mean, anybody who's really dived into the theory and stuff really, or is like really worked on their game, can kind of see how that is kind of standard in a spot like this. It's like you have so many opportunities to either make a better hand or just win the pot later. If your opponent, if the board runs out really bad for like certain hands, like you have opportunities to bluff, you have plenty of equity against a lot of the range, and it's kind of funny to hear you say that calling with queen high, facing a check raise is standard.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it sounds a little odd, especially heads up too. It's like, it makes it, I guess, a little easier.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, we get to the turn, it's a complete brick, and then I think Colin kind of slows down here, right? He
Hmm.
checks over
Yeah.
to you, and you choose to check back. Tell me
Yeah.
about that decision.
Yeah. I mean, it's, when I'm calling on the flop, it's not so I can just like take the pot away on the turn or, try to bluff him on the river. I'm just playing my hand how I think I need to play, and then we're going to see the turn, and I'm going to play appropriately how I think I need to play. So on the 4, I thought that his betting frequency would be greatly reduced. I thought that he was still going to check a lot of hands like 10x, and then I thought a lot of those draws that he had were going to check as well. And I thought mostly his like higher equity stuff would still bet, and I didn't really want to bet for like a small size and try to set up for him to fold like a 10 basically, because I didn't think he would ever fold that, and I was more interested in playing against the weaker portion of the range. And I knew that, yeah, I think betting would be a reasonable strategy for a really small size, especially with a hand like queen high, because we don't we want to have probably some hands that are going to bet and be able to fold that don't have a ton of equity, which I don't think that queen jack would have a ton of equity if I got raised.
Yeah.
So I'm not like thinking this is a slam dunk, like sick, great check on the turn.
Yeah.
I think it was good against him. I think that, I think it's the best play. Like we're deep enough to where I want to make sure that, I don't invest a bunch of chips into this pot and then put myself in a situation where I'm, going to be playing 5 or 10 blinds for the rest of the heads up match.
Yeah, no, I see. It's good to get the thoughts on the turn. We get to the river. There's already a pile of chips in the middle. Comes the king of clubs, final board, 10 of hearts, 6 of hearts, 4 of spades, 4 of clubs. King of clubs, you have naked queen high with busted backdoor flush draw. Colin has jack high, and he just jams the rest of the stack in for a little over pot, I think. So what are you thinking whenever he takes this line, which I think a lot of people would probably agree is a little unconventional?
Yeah, I mean it's not as unconventional, I think, as people realize. Like it's a polar spot where he's already polar on the flop. Like he's saying he has like a strong top pair, or basically a draw or a bluff. So on the 4, excuse me, when he checks the turn, now it's a situation where he's basically using a size saying he has a 4 or king 10 for value, or maybe 6s. So yeah, on the river, I think it's just like a situation where I have to kind of like figure out what he's up to, And I think, as I was stating earlier, I think a guy like him, when I look at the board and I say, okay, there's like 3, 5, whatever, I name off, I don't remember the exact board, but I'm naming off every straight draw combination. There's flush draws. And then there might even be some hands in there that aren't supposed to be in there, which there was.
Right.
There's just so many bluff combos available to him. And why this is always like so tricky and nuanced is like, again, as I said, playing against really studied opponents, they know they have all these bluffs available to them, and they're going to choose the frequency somewhat appropriately for the situation, if not very appropriately. And I'm going to rely on that when I'm, deciding whether I'm going to call or not. If I think that this guy is not really capable of like randomizing or regulating those frequencies or just taking every bluff available and then going for it, then it's like a kind of an easy call, I think, because
Yeah.
I'm like, he just is going to have way too many bluffs. And I actually felt like before I put the money in, I like really expected to win. I just felt really like he was definitely over bluffing.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like this goes back to what we said earlier, is like the small things that you notice early on in the final table can really change what your strategy is, especially in a huge spot like this. I mean, you talk about like the difference between like what someone should have in theory and what someone should have in practice. I know on your Instagram you have like, I subscribe to game theory optional, and I like that a lot. GTO is being game theory optional, because this is an exact scenario where like this call might be correct in theory, but it's much easier to make in practice because of what you've seen Colin do early on. Like once you start saying things like, these are the bluffs he should have, this is what the value is, but if I've seen it be more aggressive, then maybe I can throw in more hands in there that aren't supposed to be there. This becomes, more of a call. It squeaks over that line. And like you said, you can feel a lot more confident about doing something like calling with queen high. And so when people see something like this, it just seems so outlandish. It seems crazy. But when you really break it down that way, it isn't as crazy as most people think. And I think that's just the difference between like someone who has a lot of experience and someone who plays the game recreationally, is that difference in thought process, and how calling queen high for 30K can be an easy decision in some cases.
Yeah. I think the thing that like I would say people should take away from it is that like I would look at that and be like, that guy, like he called that and he was like willing to like look like an idiot. And I think I would have looked pretty bad if I was wrong. And the thing is like a lot of guys that I play poker with, you know, like Chance or Foxen, like a lot of these like great players you see, I see them look like pretty kind of foolish in a lot of situations where
Yeah.
it's like they pick up on something, or they think they see something and they go for some significant action and it doesn't work out. And like a lot of the best players that you see, like they're all willing to put the money in and look dumb if they're wrong. And it's hard to do at first, you know, like
Yeah.
I made a big hero call at the Win Millions with the final two tables left, and I knew that if I was wrong, it was going to be look bad and it was going to be so painful. And once I was in this like long tank, I spent the last minute of the tank just telling myself, okay, you've decided this is a call for these reasons. And I was like, okay, your wife is here. There's all these people here. If he's going to turn over the straight or the flush or a pair that's higher than yours, like you're just going to say good game. You're not going to make a scene. You're not going to cry, you know, because I was like thinking back to, I don't want to name any names, but like there's YouTube clips out there.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was just kind of like using some time to like center myself to where I could just like call, be wrong, look really foolish, and just be like, good game, guys. It was a great experience or whatever. Because I needed that time in a big moment. So my point in sharing this story is that it's not easy. It's not easy to get into high pressure situations and do unconventional things and trust yourself. It takes time. I had to even coach myself in certain situations, but all great players share that trait, and I would just encourage you to just try to emulate that.
Yeah. Got to be willing to be wrong sometimes. You
Yeah.
know, you got to be willing to be okay with being wrong. And I think a lot of people struggle with that in poker. So, yeah, it's very, very consistent across the board. Well, congrats on that, man. It was a sick call. It was a sick hand. I loved watching it. It was a lot of fun. I did hear that you got the biggest bluff through of the tournament after, though, when you got home, whenever to your
yeah.
wife when you were talking about it.
She's a tough one to bluff. I don't think I got it through. So the way she's basically what you're referring to is, so I got home. I live close by, so I got home and I walked in the door and I was like, "Oh, babe." She saw me. I was like, "I did my best. I got second." And I was like, kind of like, walked by her, went and grabbed my son, and was like, you know, I was like, there wasn't much I could do today. I was like, I think I played well,
Yeah.
and I felt pretty good about it. And then like the hand was. And then I saw her attention kind of shift away from the stream, and the hand was getting ready to start. But then I was like, well, you should watch this hand, though. This one's interesting. Because, like, and I felt like at that moment she got suspicious.
She raised an eyebrow. Yeah.
She's tough to get a bluff through on.
Yeah.
And then, like, she even said after, she was like, I really felt like that you won, but it was like too high stakes to be wrong. Because if she was like, no, you didn't lose, I think you won.
Yeah.
And I lost, I would have been like, what the fuck are you talking about? You just need to sit here and like tell me all, you know? So she basically said she felt like it was like too high stakes to be wrong.
Yeah.
But
Well,
her intuition, women's intuition, man, like, you know, I'm just saying, like, if I get into poker table with a woman, especially with my wife at the table, like, I'm probably... You don't want to bet on me.
Yeah.
You don't want to bet on
Fair
me.
enough. I mean, I feel like she knows her opponent pretty well in that case. So.
She does.
But that's funny, man. That's a funny story that you guys can kind of, you have that kind of relationship. So
yeah, we're always trying to bluff each other.
Yeah, that's good to hear, man. Well, congratulations again. Coming into the end of this here, I did just want to ask, like, what's next for you, man? You've already mentioned you're going to take some shots at some bigger tournaments. Anything else you want to talk about coming up, personal family life, or anything else you got going on poker-wise?
Yeah, I'm going to start my coaching practice back up.
Oh, really? Okay,
yeah.
Awesome.
So I was doing quite a bit of coaching in the last, I'd say just post-COVID, when I went on my tournament run. I focused only on getting coached and playing. And now I think I'm looking to, especially with my daughter being born, she's 4 months old. Like every second I spend away from the house is a bit of torture. So I really enjoy and like delight in the prospect that I could just be at home and, make some money and do something that I enjoy. I love teaching.
Yeah.
Every person that I coach is like a puzzle that I have to figure out.
Yeah, that's a cool way of thinking about it.
So yeah, I enjoy it. And yeah, I'm going to start that back up. I've just taken on a few new clients and I'm already really enjoying it. So I'm going to put something out on socials about that. Other than that, yeah, I mean, just playing bigger and really testing myself and testing my bankroll.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it responds.
Yeah. Well, that's cool, man. Glad to hear you're still pushing yourself and that you're able to spend some more time at home. But thanks for taking some time, sitting down and talking with me for a little bit.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Thank you guys for listening. That was Andrew Moreno. We will see you guys in the next one.
All right, man. It was good.